This episode is going to be a bit different. What you're about to hear is the first installment of Casey's story, the true-ish story of Casey and Jake and their relationship, which started off as a dream and ended in a total nightmare. We'll follow along as Casey meets Jake, and we'll witness her slowly realize he's not the man she thought he was. As Jake ruins Casey's life piece by piece, she learns a lot about who she is, the people she relies on for support, and what she can do to never, ever be in this situation again. If you'd like to hear the rest of Casey's story, please click on the link in the show notes to subscribe. This is Casey's story. This is the true-ish story of a woman who survived a relationship with an extreme narcissist. Trigger warning for emotional abuse, coercion, threats of death, threats of physical abuse, depression, suicidality, custody battle, and sexual assault. To listen to the rest of Casey's story, find the link in the show notes to subscribe. Casey's story is based on true events. However, it is not one person's story. It's an amalgamation of stories that I've seen and heard throughout the years working with clients who have experienced narcissistic abuse. If you recognize details of your story, it may be because these stories have a lot of commonalities. All identifying details have been changed. Casey's story is a representation of what can happen in a relationship with a narcissistic person. Take care as you listen. It started out pretty great. Casey told all her friends about this new guy. She lost count of the number of times she said, "He seems almost too good to be true." And later, she would realize that was her first clue of what was to come. Jake was a well-known doctor in the community in which she lived, a mid-sized college town where most people know each other, but you could still go out and feel a little bit anonymous if you wanted to. Jake was an OBGYN, which Casey thought was interesting at first. She took it as a sign that he appreciated women, understood their bodies in a way that would be unique, and his hundreds of female patients felt safe with him at their most vulnerable moment. Talk about green flags. He was handsome, a bit short for her, but super charming, humble, and a really good listener. On their first few dates, she did what she and her friends called the question test. If a date didn't ask them a single question about themselves, it was over before it started. If they asked like 1 to 3 questions, they might be worth a second chance. And if they seemed genuinely interested and invested in them and asked lots of questions, amazing, winner. Jake was a first-class listener. He somehow got Casey to pour out her life story to him within the first 3 weeks of getting to know each other. She told him all about her family life growing up. She was a child of divorced parents, technically emotionally neglected, but no physical abuse. Her past relationships, there were some doozies in there, and her most traumatic experiences in life so far. We'll get to those later. She felt like she could trust him, and all his responses were spot on. He was just the right amount of caring without being condescending, and he was supportive without trying to fix things. He was just right. And it was uncanny, the things that he seemed to just guess about her. He just seemed to know her in a way no one else had before. Not to mention all the things they had in common. When they were chatting on FaceTime one night, Jake mentioned that he had a really bad experience with an ex. "She stalked me," he said, shaking his head. "Honestly, she was nuts. And I hate to tell you this because I don't like to speak badly about people, but no, I shouldn't tell you. I don't want you to think I'm just talking shit." "No, tell me," Casey said, reassuring him. "I know you're a good guy, and I want you to be able to confide in me and know I won't judge you." Reluctantly, Jake said, "Okay, well, here goes." And out spilled this wild story of an ex named Helen, who seemed really normal but got increasingly controlling and ended up cheating on him, begging him to get back with her. And when he broke up with her, she started showing up at his workplace, which is a total no-no because he's a doctor and a professional. Helen sounded unhinged, and the way Jake told the story, Casey felt so sad for Jake, and honestly, a little scared for herself. What if this Helen person found out about her and ended up stalking her too? Jake assured Casey that he hadn't heard from Helen in about 6 months, and that he was sure she had moved on to somebody else by now. You know how psycho people are. They find their next target and then they focus on making their life a living hell. Hearing about Helen made Casey feel surprisingly much closer to Jake. She felt like he could understand how she felt when she'd been sexually assaulted in college by a friend of hers. Like, how can someone you love betray you like that? Someone you trust. Jake got that, and Casey felt even safer with him. He could never do to her what Helen had done to him, or that friend in college had done to her. 6 years later, Casey sits in my office, sobbing. She tells me about her upcoming court date, how she hasn't seen her children in 3 months, how she's on the verge of homelessness and not sure she can go on. Who's the cause of all this? How did she get here? One word. Jake. To hear the rest of Casey's story, subscribe using the link in the show notes. See you next time.